My name is Sue Legatt. I'm the new program officer for the Central Minnesota Arts Board. I started in January, but I've been a visual artist and a teacher for over 25 years. I identify as a middle-aged white woman. I have dark eyes and dark hair, and um, I just moved back to Central Minnesota from Fargo-Moorhead, so I'm glad to be here. This is the land of my people. And yeah, it's nice that I can apply my knowledge and help as many people as I can to achieve their creative goals and aspirations. So, all right. So before we get started, I just want to draw attention to our funding sources, both the Minnesota State and the Minnesota Legacy Amendment, as well as the McKnight Foundation fund our activities and our efforts. So thank you to them and thank you to the voters of the Minnesota for supporting that amendment. All right, grant writing. This is a big subject. This can often be a very intimidating thing, especially if you're brand new to it. So we're going to try during this webinar to sort of break it down. We've come up with a sort of a top 10 list of tips to help you through the grant writing process. That's going to be what we discuss first. After that, we're going to talk specifically about the Artist Career Development Grant, which is one of our most popular grants for individual artists. And then after that, we're going to talk about one of my passions, which again, I'm a big nerd, but I'm very passionate about artist statements. So this is something that trips up a lot of people, and I'm going to try to work through that, what exactly should be in an artist statement and how you would use it professionally. So again, there will be time for questions. If something pops up for you while I'm presenting, you can enter that in the chat in case you're worried about forgetting it. Melissa's going to keep track of those and she will share them with us after each section of the presentation. And then at the very end, again, we will have time to do maybe a deeper dive or to address additional questions. If you do need additional assistance, Zoom allows for a transcription as well as closed caption. At the bottom, you have those options. And then this is being recorded, so we will post this on our YouTube channel afterwards, and you can use it as a reference later on. Okay, so our top 10 list. Number 10. Don't wait to start your application. Review the guidelines and get organized. There is never a good time to sit down and create all the content you need and address everything in every application in one setting. Work on it incrementally when you have the time. And once you have the individual portions figured out, like your artist statement, your resume, things like that, it's a lot easier to have them ready to go and bring them in. But the general tip is review the guidelines and, if possible, open the application and start looking at those individual fields, the information that they're going to request. Do that in advance so you know what you need to prepare for your application. Writing a grant is a privilege, and it takes a lot to have, to sit down and allow yourself the time to focus your thoughts and get everything organized. So if you're like me and you have a busy life, it might be 10 minutes here, 20 minutes here, maybe you get an hour on the weekend, but you start putting that together and you can kind of round it out over time. Whoops. So in our grant applications, this is kind of what they look like. All of the grants have criteria that are required for the grant applications. And then that criteria is broken into criteria statements. Use these statements as a guide when you're preparing and writing your application. So those statements are the same ones that the evaluator used to determine the strength of an application. You are not going to be asked in the application to address each individual statement. So it's not going to say, please address the proposed activities and how they will continue to, blah, blah, blah. But all of this information that's being asked for in the criteria statements should be addressed in some capacity throughout the application. So again, those are the criteria statements, the individual criteria. Every application is slightly different in what it's going to ask you to submit for your criteria statements. So pay really close attention to those, because what might be asked in this application is not asked in this application. One of the things I like to do is write a manifesto, which is literally everything that I'm going to be addressing in either a project or, long-term sort of goal. If I have this huge plan and I can break it up incrementally into different sections, then this grant can fund this section, and then I can use that to get to the next section, and so on and so forth. So phases or processes, everything that you're going to need, just write it all out, and then you can start filling in the gaps and how to address each of those. All right, number 9. I have to move something so I can see better. All right, number 9, write and share before you go into the portal. Prepare everything separately in Word docs or in different files, and then you can copy and paste it into your application portal as needed. The best thing about this is that, especially with your artist statement and your proposal description or narrative, you get to share that with other people. Our evaluators on our review panels are just regular people out in the community who have an interest in the arts, who have experience with the arts and with arts organizations. So if you can write something and share it with other people who are interested in the arts or who have connections within the arts, they're going to be the same type of people who are reviewing your application, and they will be able to tell you what might be a little confusing or where you didn't provide enough information. And that'll help you round out your application as well before you submit it into the portal for the actual review. Number 8, do not forget your collaborators. Get letters of intent and then honor them in your budget. So, if you're a visual artist like me, and I was proposing to do a new body of work and I was going to have an exhibition at the end, it might be helpful. It's not required, but it might be helpful for me to have a letter of intent from the organization where I'll be exhibiting the work, especially if it's like a big step up for me professionally. This demonstrates that what I'm proposing is something that I will actually be able to do. So I would have that letter of intent saying I am working with this organization or this exhibition space, and what I'm asking to fund is actually something I've prepared and can happen. At the same time, if you're collaborating with somebody and they're contributing to your work, you're going to want to name them, provide background information about who that person is, and then make sure that they are honored in the budget in some way. Even if you just say, I will be sharing my stipend with this individual, or something along those lines. I do want to say that depending on the grant and who you are applying to, funding can get a little tricky if you're funding somebody outside of Minnesota, or if it's somebody who would otherwise be ineligible to apply for the grant. So mention your collaborators, do the research in advance to make sure how you recognize them and honor them in the budget is eligible for that particular grant application. Collaborators from outside your own community do need to be explained, and you want to be careful that you don't tokenize them. For example, if you were proposing to do a piece, like an installation, and part of the installation was going to include, music from a community that is not your own, you're going to need to explain that so that it doesn't feel like you're appropriating somebody else's culture into to enhance your own work. Um, Make sure again that you explain that well, and that you honor them, and you provide funding or some form of compensation so that they are being respected. All right, number 7, know your goals. Turn them into outcomes and evaluations. Outcomes and evaluation methods are a huge subject. They get tripped up a lot. Essentially, you want to think of it as an if then statement, and that then should be a change that happens. So if I get the funding, then I will be able to do this thing, which will change my trajectory or change my experience or change my ability in some way. The evaluation method is how you are going to determine whether or not that change has happened and if you were successful. Whoops. Okay. Output often gets confused for outcome. Output is the result of something happening. So, for example, I would like to get funding to produce a CD, a new body of music. An output would be I produce that new body of music. But an output doesn't have a measurable change. The outcome is the measurable change. And it would be something like if I produce this new body of music, I will be able to reach a wider audience, effectively enhancing my professional experience. Or um, as a new venture, I'm going to be collaborating with a new artist. And this is going to provide me growth in my creative process. I'm going to reach a new community, so on and so forth. Or I'm going to educate my community about this other cultural expression. So there's a change that happens with an outcome. Output is just, I got this and this happened. So really focus on the change that's going to happen if you get the funding. And then here's another example. I'm sorry, I don't have the presenter view on, so I'm I'm going as we go here. So example, I got a new inkjet printer to create a collection of photographs about Minnesota wildflowers. The output, the images are exhibited with information about medicinal qualities of the flowers. But the outcome is that exhibition guests will learn about the medicinal uses of Minnesota's wildflowers. So the learning is the change that is happening. Um, The outcome, the exhibition guests will learn about the medicinal uses of wildflowers. How do you measure that? That's the evaluation method. So, exhibition guests will be given a fun and brief quiz to fill out during the exhibition. Upon completion, gallery staff will award guests with a free small print. Participation will be measured by how many prints are given. So, the quiz is going to demonstrate learning has happened. And because they turn that in to get the print, you can keep track of how many prints are handed out. And now you know how many people participated in that learning experience. So you get two forms of feedback or documented results of the learning experience. All right, number 6, make no assumptions. When you're writing your application, you want to avoid using abbreviations unless you explain the full title and then put the abbreviation in parentheses afterwards. Assume that your panel does not know the abbreviation. They do not know the other artists that you are referencing. In fact, honestly, avoid referencing other artists altogether. But they don't know the technical knowledge. They may not know all of that insider terminology that you're using. So explain things fully all the way through and make sure that you are providing them with very clear and thorough information. If you do have to use a technical term, explain what that means. Sometimes when you're creating work, you're using something or there's something in your process that is very specific, and you want to bring that out to show the unique aspects of your work. So say what that thing is and then explain how it is unique or explain how it's important to your creative process. Number 5, write with confidence. You want to avoid using passive language. Instead of saying, my artwork should inform an audience or it is the hope that this will happen, write with confidence and say, my artwork will inform an audience or my work will do this thing. The passive language, the shoulds, the coulds, the mights, they can kind of subconsciously cast doubt on the panel that you are actually confident in yourself and in your work to achieve the things that you are saying you're going to achieve. So, right, knowing that you've done your research and you are prepared to back it up with data or whatever documentation you may have, but write with that confidence in knowing that the goals and the outcomes that you're proposing in your application are achievable and that you can do them. Number 4, plan your timeline and budget carefully. Timelines can often be one of the trickiest things in an application for a grant because you can't retroactively fund a project, but you also struggle with waiting to start a project until you get funding. So, again, plan your project in a way where you can do some of the background research and some of the work leading up to the moment when you get funded, and then you can hit the ground running. Um, Different grants have different timelines. We're very lucky at CMAB that our timelines are pretty quick. The turnaround from when you apply to when you find out you've been funded can be very short compared to some other grant applications where it can take almost a year to find out if you were funded. So, when you're planning your timeline, I like to think of it in terms of how long it will take me to complete something and not necessarily when something has to happen. That works great for an individual artist who's doing their own self driven research and project. If you're applying to do something that has a specific date, like you want to attend a conference or a workshop on this day, make sure that you plan far enough ahead that you can apply for the grant, find out if you were funded before the deadline or before the date that it is to register or, fly out or whatever it happens to be. So you're either going to be planning on the front end and working your way up to that deadline, or you're going to be planning once you hit that deadline and get funded, what's going to happen afterwards. And then the budget corresponds with that. So make sure if you have something happening in your proposal that's going to require a lot of time and a significant amount of your budget, those two things should match up. We shouldn't find anything in the budget that doesn't appear in the narrative or in the timeline, and vice versa. If you reference something in your proposal, in your project description, that should be demonstrated and it should show up in your timeline and in your budget. Um, for example, if you were going to do a lot of research at a location that's like 3 hours away, you're going to do plein air painting or you were going to do sound recordings or whatever, your timeline is going to have to allow for that travel, whether it's back and forth or you're going to go up for a full week. And then your budget should also demonstrate the travel expense, right, of going back and forth. And I say that if the particular grant application allows for travel expenses. But make sure your timeline, your budget, and your narrative all match and there's no inconsistencies because that can trip up a review panel and cause some confusion. And I have seen some grant applications tank because something was in the narrative, but it was not in the budget, and vice versa. Um, I want to stress that nothing can be done in your project until, no, nothing can be paid for with the grant in your project until you are awarded that grant. So as soon as you get the notification that you have received the grant, then those expenses can start happening. We fund 80% of the grant reward upfront, and then you get the remainder 20% after you submitted your final report. And you also have 12 months to complete whatever it is that you're going to be doing from the date that it is approved or you're notified, essentially 12 months from that date. Our budget structure has changed a little bit for some of our grants. For the individuals, we now have, it says drop menu. It's actually like fields that you can fill in. So it's individual lines. We used to have more of a narrative thing where people wrote out what they were going to do. And I love the change because now I can put in supplies, $300, travel, $200, instead of like having to explain it. And sometimes it's bullet points, sometimes it's written out. So the new structure really breaks it down and makes it easy for individuals to figure out what it is, everything that they're going to be putting into their budget and how it adds up at the end. For organizations, which we're not really talking about today, but for organizations, they have an Excel spreadsheet that is even more detailed than the individual fields that we offer now. This is what those individual fields look like. So the eligible expenses, you would enter each one here along with the amount on the right-hand column. And then at the bottom, it tallies it all up for you. Okay. Number 3, work samples. Work samples are extremely important. Make sure your work samples really demonstrate what you have done in the past that is relevant to what you are proposing in your application. For example, if I wanted to go into a new branch of work and I was going to be doing interviews and creative writing and storytelling, I would have to work very hard to explain that because my background is in photography. So what evidence do I have to support that I'm capable of achieving what I'm proposing to do? At the same time, as a photographer, I might have, this project I did 10 years ago and this project and this project. If I'm proposing something, I want to make sure that the samples I'm providing are relevant to what I'm proposing. So I wouldn't do portraiture if I was proposing landscape work. Um, if you are a performing artist, you would want to submit recordings to show your ability, not photographs. I can take a picture of myself on stage talking. That's not a good example of my singing ability, for example. So work samples are very, very important. Review panels forgive a lot if the work samples are strong. For our applications, you can submit 5 images, which are JPEG, 7 pages of text, 7 minutes of a recording, and that can be audio or video. And then you also have the option of submitting a link to a website. You can only pick one of these, so be really strategic about what you're doing, especially if you're sort of a multidisciplinary person. If you do the link to the website page, you're still held to the same standards where you can only have 5 images on that page, or you can only have a total of 7 minutes of recording. If your recording is longer than 7 minutes, just put in the description area for your work samples the portion of the recording that you want the review panel to watch so that it adds up to 7 minutes. Again, visual artists, 1800 pixel maximum and good lighting. When I say strong work samples, it doesn't mean they have to be created by a professional who's documented it or you hired a recording team to record you on stage, but it should be representative of who you are and your abilities and what you are proposing to do. I do want to say if you are a performing artist, and this might come up in my next slide, but I'm not sure. If you are performing on stage or you are doing some type of recording of you singing or whatever it is, make sure you point out which person is you if you're on stage with several other people, because that can get very confusing as well. Yes, and that is on the next slide. So make sure it's a recording. Performing artist, if you're submitting a recording, audio or video, MP3, MP4, a WAV or a WAV, and then a WMA. And again, point out which person is you and who you are performing. Before we go on, I also want to say, use the description area for your work samples really strategically. This is your opportunity to provide insider information that may go beyond your artist statement or beyond your proposal description. Why did you choose that particular work sample? What in it specifically do you want the review panel to look at? What information can you give to give us um, better insight into your research, your creative process, whatever it happens to be? So use that description area very strategically. You do want to tell us the title of the piece, when it was created, what medium you may have used, what the background or what excerpt it is, if it's from a play or from a song or something like that. But give us that inside information as well. Okay, number two, avoid double dipping. This does not happen very often for individuals. Essentially, it means that you got multiple funding sources or multiple grants, and you accidentally or intentionally, but hopefully, I don't think any of you would do that. But you applied to fund this set of supplies or from this grant, and then you applied to this opportunity and you funded the exact same set of supplies. Double dipping only happens when you have multiple funding sources paying for the exact same thing. You can, for example, if your project is designed in a way that allows it, you can get funding to cover, say, for example, this grant is going to cover your supplies, while this funding source, grant, whatever, covers your time and transportation. So the two funds are supporting the same project, but they're not supporting the same item within that project. And again, this is very uncommon for individuals, but because of the significance and how harmful it can be to you as an applicant, but also to the granting agency, it's a pretty important thing to keep in mind. I also like to say it suggests, again, design your project in a way where you have phases or you have multiple layers so you can get this funding here and this funding here, and you can build up and keep strengthening your work and growing as an individual. And then the number one tip, just answer the question. Every grant is going to have those information fields where you can submit your narrative or you can input, upload something. Make sure what you are addressing in that field is what that field is asking for. Keep referring back to the statement or what that field is supposed to be about, and make sure that everything you are writing and putting in there is relevant to that statement. The criteria statements should show up and be addressed throughout your application. Again, there's not going to be necessarily criteria statement, address it, criteria statement, address it. So what it is going to say is proposal description and a field where you address it. And then within that proposal description, you keep those criteria statements in mind so that you're ticking them off and you're making sure that you have addressed all of those criteria statements throughout your application, your proposal description, your artist statement, your work samples, so on and so forth. But just answer the question and don't allow yourself to meander and go off. And if you're not clear exactly on what they're asking, sometimes things can feel repetitive. Feel free to ask the granting agency to separate them out for you. What exactly do they mean by this one, and what exactly do they mean by this? That's going to be really helpful. But we're going to go on. We're going to talk specifically about the Artist Career Development Grant. To help prepare us for that, for grant writing, I like to just give a real quick background into CMAB's grant structure, which is pretty comparable and similar to other granting agencies. So first, the organization creates the application and makes it public. Applicants then submit their applications, and the organization will put together a group or a panel to review those applications. They are instructed to review each application individually, referencing the information provided with those criteria statements. So this is the trick, right? You have access to those criteria statements that are the same criteria statements the panel uses to determine the strength of your application. So you've got the score, you've got the cheat sheet right in front of you, and you can use that when you're writing. The panelists then meet and they give every application a score. They score them individually. All the panelist scores are averaged out to give the application a final total score. We fund from the highest score to the lowest until we run out of money. Those funding recommendations are then given to our board to approve. And then once the board approves them, you are notified and you can start doing whatever it is you're doing. At the end, I didn't put this on there, but once you're done with your project, there is a final report that you will need to submit just to say, did you accomplish your goals? How did it go? Are there any changes you would make in the future? And so on. If you are newer to granting, but you've been involved in projects and in the arts for a while, it's a really good idea to sit on one of those review panels. You learn so much about grant writing, about what confuses a panel, what information is lacking, and how different people respond to different types of information. So sit on one of those review panels and it will make you a better grant writer. The CMAB Artist Career Development Grant is an annual grant that we provide. It can fund performances and exhibitions, equipment and consumable materials like supplies, improving your workspace, publishing expenses, whoever asked earlier, creative time, so literally paying yourself to do the work, and then things like workshops, training, mentorships, apprenticeships, learning opportunities as well. It is $4,000. It goes to creatives in Benton, Sherburne, Stearns, and Wright County. You must be 18 years of age or older, and it goes towards U.S. citizens or permanent resident aliens. The deadline for the draft review is July 24th. The draft review is where you submit your application and request a review. The staff will look at your application and provide recommendations on what you could do to make it stronger. Then you go and you adjust it however you see fit, and then you submit for the final deadline, which is August 7th. Those will go through the panel review and they will be approved by the board on October 9th. So again, know these dates. So when you're planning your project, if it's approved by the board on the 9th, give it, a week so that the staff can then send out those notifications of who's been awarded. So you can probably start working around the 15th or 16th of October is when you can fund effort on your project. You can do all the research up to that point, but funding starts about a week after that board review. The review criteria is artistic merit and quality, demonstrated need, and ability. And then the 12 points, and 6 points. For artistic merit and quality, the criteria statements are the proposed activity will contribute to the applicant's artistic growth and/or capacity as an artist. The applicant's work exhibits originality, technical skill, and a personal artistic vision or voice. And the applicant's work samples evoke emotion, intellectual inquiry, and other responses from the audience. I want to be very clear that artistic merit and quality is not exceptional technical skill, especially for this grant, which focuses on development and career development. Artistic merit and quality is original thinking or the ability to express ideas creatively and the dedication to improving your technical skills. So we're looking for original expression and the effort to continue to improve your ability. Demonstrated need is applicant has identified how the proposed activities will benefit their artistic growth, and the proposal aligns with the applicant's long-term artistic goals. Financial need is not demonstrated need. And then ability. The proposed activities are appropriate to the applicant's level of skill and experience. The applicant has outlined a timeline for implementing their proposal that is logical, detailed, and addresses challenges or barriers. And the budget is appropriate to the proposed actions, outcomes, and goals. For the project description, those are the criteria statements, like I said, that's what they're going to be looking for to make sure you've addressed those criteria in your application. How you address those criteria are in the individual information fields. For this grant, the biggest one is going to be the project description. What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? Why are you going to do it? What do you need to do it and why? And what will happen when you do it? What change will occur? That what change will occur is your outcome. You also can submit the project description as written. You can do an audio recording and you can do a video recording. We recognize that grant writing favors people with a certain language skill set, especially written skill set. So we allow for people to express their ideas through audio and video submissions as well. If you want to submit audio or video submission, I recommend that you think about the criteria statements and almost interview yourself, right? And you can do the same thing if you're writing as well. So the first criteria statement, and then how am I going to do that? I can interview myself and I can address that. I can write it out or I can do a recording. Make sure your proposal aligns with the long-term artistic goals is one of the criteria statements. That can become, how does this align with my long-term artistic goals? You want to make sure the audio is clear. Be yourself. You know, if you're funny, be funny. If you're detailed, be detailed. It's okay. Um, you can only input one file. So the MP3 or the MOV or MP4, you can submit one file per field that allows for those types of files. Not all of our information fields allow you to submit a file as opposed to writing it out. Some of them you do have to write in the information. The biggest thing is make sure that you're speaking clearly or that your recording is clear and that we can actually hear you. Otherwise, it's unfortunate that we can't get the information because of a technical aspect of some kind. Okay, the other information fields for the Artist Career Development Grant are the location of the proposal, where will the work happen, the start and end dates, as well as the timeline. So you're going to break that information down, any collaborators you may have, and then your training and experience, kind of like a resume, but this is narrative. It's not asking for you to upload a file like your resume. Your work samples and the budget. There is additional video that helps break down work samples and how important they are. And then we are currently working on videos to break down the budget and how you would input that and that information as well. These are all on our YouTube channel. After you're funded, this is right, you got funded, yay! If you're cruising along and you're working on your stuff and then something terrible happens and you cannot execute the project as you proposed, your collaborator backs out, your performance space closes, whatever, you would want to contact CMAB right away because you may need to submit an amendment. You usually only submit an amendment if a major change has happened that is beyond your control. Ideally, that amendment would include your plan to address that change. So if this performance space closed and you can't use it anymore, you're going to say, okay, I would like to propose that I shift over to this performance space, or I had to change my date, or we had to reschedule, stuff like that. Contact CMAB offices as soon as possible and we'll discuss it with you. And then if necessary, you can submit an amendment and you're going to want to include documentation for the correction. All of this will then transfer over so that you can address it again in your final report. The final report is a requirement for all of our grants. You're going to want to share your successes so we can celebrate you and tell everybody about the amazing work that you did. The impact stories are especially helpful. I like to recommend to people that as you're doing your project, keep a journal. And if something happens in the spur of the moment that really resonated with you, put it in your journal so that at the end of the project, when you're filling out your final report, you can share that with the granting agency. You can tell us that. And then we can use that later as an example of the power of this funding program. Because again, our funding comes from the state of Minnesota, and the politicians are going to decide to support that and continue that. So sharing those impact stories are a really big, they're a really great tool for us, and they're very, very helpful. Yeah, so keep a journal because sometimes those impact things happen and you go, oh, that was really great. And then you completely forget about it at the final report. If you're like me, I forget about it. You know, journals are everything. So keep a journal, keep track of everything that's happening. And it's also helpful too if you're going to continue the project or do something in the future, you have that journal to remind yourself like, oh yeah, that thing didn't work the way I wanted it to, so I got to change that. Oh, there, keep a journal. Keep the granting agency informed if you're having an event, if you make a postcard, if you're putting it out onto social media. Make sure that we're aware of it so that we can help promote or and encourage you in whatever way it is. Send a thank you card to the granting agency after you are awarded and just keep that relationship strong. And then use one thing to get to the next thing. So again, break that project into phases and keep building off of the work that you've done. I want to say too, it's not on the slide, but um, when you get funded, you will receive a contract. And part of the contract or part of the expectation is that when you promote your project or when you let people know that this thing is happening, there's an acknowledgement statement, and we will provide you with logos and what that statement actually is. So any promotional things that you may do, even if it's like a newspaper article after the fact, you're going to want to make sure you include that acknowledgement statement. You reference that it was funded through CMAB and through, McKnight or Legacy or whatever it happens to be. Okay, we're going to pause again. If there's any questions specific about the Artist Career Development Grant. Okay. If there's no questions, we are going to keep going. We're going to go into my favorite thing, which I think is for a lot of people one of the more, well, grant writing is scary in itself, but this this tends to trip people up. When I was a teacher, I was working in the university system, and I did a lot of times I had the professional development classes or the senior capstone classes, the kids who are doing their thesis and getting ready to go out into the world and be professional artists. And it was my personal mission to make sure everybody left with a really great artist statement. So I am excited to share that passion with all of you. The artist statement is, in my opinion, the most important thing that an artist can write about their work because it gets attached to practically every single thing you do. It's on the website, it's on promotional materials. If you're reaching out to an organization about hosting you or sharing your work in some way, they're going to want to see that. And writing an artist statement helps you become more clear and concise in what it is you are actually doing with your work. So get ready because I love talking about artist statements. I'm a huge nerd. So there are 4 things that should be included in your artist statement, and I'm going to break it down and talk about each one. The first one is, who are you as an artist? Why are you an artist? Why have you chosen to express yourself in this way? Um, do you work spontaneously? Are you very research oriented? Is your work really heavy and conceptual like mine? Is it very lighthearted? But who are you as an artist? So, for example, that sentence, that first sentence might look something like this. As a rural Minnesotan and daughter of poor dairy farmers, my connection to land and place takes center stage in every song I create. This sentence provides a lot of information for the person who's taking it in and who's about to experience your work or who has just experienced your work. You're saying that you come from a poor family, you're Minnesotan, so you're Midwestern, you feel a connection to land and place, and then center stage in every song I create suggests you are a musician of some kind. So there's a lot of information in that one sentence, both in your background and how you bring that background into the work, but then also what kind of work you create as an artist. The second thing you want to address is, what is your work about? So I'm a photographer. and a photographer is huge range of subject matter in how I work and what I choose to photograph, how I photograph those things, right? So what is your work about? You're going to want to prepare the audience, inform them a little bit so that they can start tuning in to either what they're about to see, or if they've already experienced the work and now they're getting the statement, they can go, oh yeah, I did notice that, right? So that sentence might look something like this. I am inspired by the traditional melodies I heard growing up, a collage of Polish, German, and Scandinavian rhythms that make you want to dance even when you're exhausted from fieldwork. So I'm suggesting, or I'm saying in this second thing, that I'm influenced by European rhythms, their collage. So my audience would expect to hear kind of an assortment, right? Where things are mixing together. And then they make you want to dance when you're exhausted from field work. That dancing language and saying just the word dance generally doesn't suggest it's going to be very, somber, slow music. It's going to be peppy because it makes you want to dance even when you're exhausted. So, a collage of European influences, it's going to be more upbeat and peppy, kind of saying, where I draw my influence from and how I regurgitate that and put it out into the world. Number three that you want to address, how you make your music. Are you working, again, I'll use photography as an example. If I was going to make landscape images, how I make it. Am I an experimental digital person? Do I like still using the darkroom? Am I 19th century? Do I create the photographs and then transfer them into drawings? Right? There's a huge range again. So, how are you actually technically creating the work that you're doing in whatever capacity? And this is the one that can trip people up because a lot of times we might use a technical term that is not very common. I use something called shinkale. Very few people know what shinkale is, right? So if I was going to say shinkale in my artist statement, I would put comma, a traditional practice of Japanese layering, blah, 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 right? So that might look something like this. Using a combination of European instruments such as guitar, piano, and accordion, with state of the art digital equipment and software, I invite an ever evolving sound that juxtaposes the practices of my ancestors with my modern interests. So I'm saying which instruments I'm using. I'm saying that I process them digitally, that it's an ever evolving sound, which means I'm not somebody who sticks in the same area. I'm constantly bringing in new experiences and new influences. And then I thrive on this juxtaposition of traditional sound with contemporary practices and what I want to bring in from my ancestors, but then what I want to bring in as a person living in the 21st century. Number four, why should people care? That sounds harsh. It's not meant to sound harsh. What is it that your audience should take away from the work? What are they going to experience, learn? How are they going to be challenged? And it is okay to challenge your audience and make them work a little. So, why should people care? What are they going to learn? How are you unique in their experience? And that might look like this. This experimental and constantly evolving approach challenges the preconception of instrumentation, encouraging the audience to embrace a multicultural, technology driven future. When we put it all together, we have four sentences, what makes one nice paragraph or two smaller paragraphs. And it looks like this. As a rural Minnesotan and daughter of poor dairy farmers, my connection to land and place takes center stage in every song I create. I am inspired by the traditional melodies I heard growing up, a collage of Polish, German, and Scandinavian rhythms that make you want to dance even when you're exhausted from fieldwork. That's the background. That's basically how I'm creating, or not how I'm creating. Why am I creating? Then the how I'm creating and how I'm putting out. So here's the first paragraph is I'm collecting. The second paragraph is what I'm putting out. Using a combination of European instruments such as guitar, piano, and accordion with state-of-the-art digital equipment and software, I invite an ever evolving sound that juxtaposes the practices of my ancestors with my modern interests. This experimental and constantly evolving approach challenges the preconception of instrumentation, encouraging the audience to embrace a multicultural, technology driven future. So, again, paragraph 1, I'm taking in, paragraph 2, I'm putting out, but the whole statement together explains to the audience why I'm an artist, where I come from, what I'm taking in, and then also what they can be prepared to experience. Or if they've already experienced it, it helps them better understand and provides more background information into what they just experienced. What it should look like. Your artist statement is generally going to be 1 to 2 paragraphs long, kind of like what we just did, either 2 short paragraphs, 1 long paragraph. You want to write it in the first person, the I, me, my statements, unless you are instructed otherwise. Some grants, some applications are anonymous and they don't want you to write in third person. Like you wouldn't say Sue Legatt creates work, right? You don't want to write in the third person because sometimes it's anonymous. So write in the first person, this is my statement. I am the artist. Keep it professional. It's not really the time to be sarcastic or to provide an inside joke because lots and lots of people are going to be reading this or taking in your artist statement. So try to keep it professional because it can be attached to everything that you do. And then provide enough information to inform, but you don't want to be so obvious or you don't want to provide so much information that the work becomes like too much for them to have their own experience and their own interpretation of the work. Art is about experiencing and interpreting something with the audience and with the viewer as well. So if you go too detailed and provide too much information, one, they might just stop reading altogether because they're like, being forced to think about something in a certain way, but it also is going to reduce their experience because now they can't project their own interpretation. Tips for successful writing. Write for everyone. Use clear, common language without getting too technical. If you do have to introduce a technical term, explain it. The average person reads English at about an 8th grade level. So you want to use clear language. You want it to be concise. You want it to be easy for most people to take in. Your statement works with your artwork. They should strengthen each other. So this is kind of like what I was saying before. You don't want to do so much information that it kind of diminishes the power of your artwork. But you can provide information that may not be obvious in the artwork. So they experience the artwork and then they take in this information and then they go, oh, I get it. Like it took it to a new level for them, right? Be yourself, allow your energy, humor, or intellect to come through. You want to stay professional, but if you're a goofy, funny person, your statement can be a little bit more lighthearted. If you're a very data, technical, research driven person, your statement can be very matter of fact and to the point. It's okay. Express yourself through your statement. Honor yourself and your culture. It's okay to use outside references as long as you explain them. If you are not a native English speaker, if that is not your first language, it is okay to put both your native language, your first language, write that, and then include the English translation in the United States, which is English is the predominant language. It's okay to include both. If your artwork uses some aspect of your cultural heritage, include that word and then explain what that word means or provide and educate your audience in some way. It's okay to make them work a little. And then only write about what you're prepared to share. Secrets can be secrets. We know as artists and as creatives, our work can get very personal. It can also get very nuanced where there's lots and lots and lots of layers. Decide what is relevant and what's going to enhance the audience's experience, but you do not have to share something you are not prepared to share. If your work is personal to the level where it's deeply, deeply personal and you don't really want to talk about that aspect of your work, don't talk about it. You do not have to share that. You don't have to give yourself away to everybody who experiences your work. So only write about what you're prepared to share and what you think is relevant that the audience should know. Artist statements can come in different forms, and some organizations or different agencies are going to ask for it in different ways. And Omar hinted at this before, where sometimes they give you like this much space, and sometimes you get all this space. So the standard form is, I'll call it the long form, which is the 1 to 2 paragraphs. You're going to want to edit that down and make something very, very short. I would say under 500 characters. So very short, like 2 to 3 sentences. The other version you're going to want to have on hand is your bio form. So it includes autobiographical information. Um, you may want to have an artist statement and a biography statement, and then you're going to want to merge those two together into your artist bio statement. I know there's a lot of background work that creatives have to do, so I'm sorry. Your artist bio statement, the artist and biography statement combined, should include personal experiences that influence your work that may not be in your artist statement. So maybe you had a really powerful, impactful, creative moment that while your work is about all of this, there's that one moment that just really drove it in a different direction or was an experience that really stands out for you professionally. Career highlights, little bit of a background thing, if you have experience, um, maybe you were previously funded by a large grant, or you got to work with this really amazing artist, you can reference that in your bio statement. And then personal facts. I like to end my bio statement with a little tidbit about my personal life. Sue Legatt currently resides in Big Lake, Minnesota with her husband and 9-year-old son, something like that, right? So just a little tidbit into who you are as a person and not necessarily as a creative. In the artist bio, you can mix all of it together and create a whole new statement, or you can take that short 2 to 3 sentence artist statement as the first paragraph and then the bio information as the second paragraph. The bio information is generally related to your work as an artist in some way, but you can also make it completely independent of your artwork. It's totally up to you. Okay, I'm gonna put my contact information up there. You can do a screen grab, you can take a picture, do whatever you want to do. You can also find myself and Melissa, Leslie, Caitlin, we're all available. You can find us on our website. That is everything I have for you guys today. Thank you for joining us. I hope this was helpful. You have my contact information if you want to email or chat about something that's percolating and you want to write a grant for. So thank you and good luck.